A cabin worth $1,000 was bought by 21-year-old Joey, who found a bargain. To truly own it, he needed to move it to his own homestead 6 kilometers away. If not moved within 2 days, the current owner was required to demolish it. These cabins, dating back to the 1920s from a decommissioned military base, were a source of affordable housing in Tanana. Joey, often clashing with his father over trivial matters, saw this as an opportunity to live separately. Stan Zure had bought his house here and moved it with a truck. Joey's house, not entirely made of wood, posed additional challenges for moving. With limited machinery in Tanana, they had to use primitive methods. They first supported the cabin with 2 large trees before laying logs underneath and pulling it with a bulldozer. In the deep forest, they found ideal large trees, trimmed them, and hauled them to the building site with a pickup. Any additions to the house had to be removed because they were not integral to the structure and could not be transported together. Parts that could be moved separately were, and those that couldn't be were dismantled and reassembled later. As they worked, the father-son conflicts continued, reinforcing Joey's determination to move. He was resolute that the cabin had to reach his homestead. Failure was not an option. To reduce conflicts, Stan Zure took on tasks that required him to be away from the site. The next day, the bulldozer was in place, and the most strenuous work began. First, they lifted the entire cabin using 4 jacks. Then, they slid the pre-prepared logs underneath it. Whether these 2 logs could support the 15-ton house was uncertain. As they slowly lowered the jacks, the logs bent slightly but held the weight. The first step was a success. Now onto the second phase, pulling the cabin away from the homestead with the bulldozer. This step was critical. Improper handling could cause the house to fall apart. Fortunately, they successfully detached the house from its foundation, a hard-earned success thanks to everyone's efforts. Now they had to tow it 6 kilometers to Joey's own homestead. They hadn't gone 100 meters before encountering a new problem. An electrical cable blocking the path, with 3 7,000-volt high-voltage lines above it. Any wrong move could be dangerous. Joey volunteered to clear the line, but Stan Zure worried whether he could handle such a risky task. In his father's eyes, Joey would always be a child, but Joey had grown up and was capable of managing such issues on his own. Thanks to Joey's efforts, the cabin successfully passed the electrical obstacle. The remaining 6 kilometers would take at least 8 hours at their current pace, but it actually took 9 hours to safely transport the cabin to Joey's homestead. The cost of moving the cabin likely exceeded $1,000, but Joey finally had his own place, and his father was genuinely happy for him. With some repairs, the cabin could be a home for decades. As Tanana's weather grew warmer, the meat stored for winter began to spoil and rot. Bears could smell this from 5 kilometers away, so it was essential to dispose of the garbage. For safety, the dump was located 3 miles from town. While throwing away the foul-smelling trash, Bob suddenly saw a bear lying above the dump. He realized he had rushed out so quickly that he had forgotten his gun, leaving him terrified and rushing back to his car. Over the past decade, there had been nearly 20 fatal bear attacks in Alaska. Normally, Charlie handled dangerous wildlife invasions, like the lone wolf he had taken down before. This black bear was at least 10 times bigger than a wolf and far more dangerous, especially for children. Because Bob had not carried a gun, Charlie criticized him. There was no time to waste. They quickly armed themselves and drove back to the dump. The footprints left at the scene suggested the bear was of medium size. After feasting at the dump, the black bear had already fled. It was crucial to clear any bears that ventured into town to prevent more from coming. Charlie's next task was to warn families with children about the black bear. In Alaska, bears are among the deadliest predators. Charlie made sure to alert James, who had many children, and was understandably worried about the safety of his kids. Over the next few days, Charlie was preoccupied with the threat of the bear. Without removing it, he found it hard to rest. Today, he and his son returned to the dump to conduct a thorough search around the area. Entering the forest, the bear's territory, they knew any mistake could lead to an attack without a chance to fire their guns. They followed the footprints deep into the forest, where garbage and deer bones stripped by the bear littered the area. The tracking was tense. Even with shotguns, a direct encounter would not favor them. However, the bear did not appear, and their search was in vain. During this period, James and his two sons also encountered the bear while walking their dog. He immediately grabbed his gun and gave chase, but once they entered the forest, the bear disappeared. It was their first time dealing with such a cunning black bear, stealthy, quick, and ghost-like, likely having moved on to forage elsewhere. For now, they could leave it be. Charlie had more pressing matters to attend to, preparing for the harsh winter ahead. This week, everyone in the town heads to the river to collect wood, storing it for winter heating. During the thaw each year, dead wood from upstream washes into the river, providing Tanana residents with an accessible source of heating material. Experts like James, who is skilled in collecting wood, can gather enough in 1 week not only to keep warm all winter but also to make a good profit. Charlie also collects wood but has more mouths to feed. Hunter Stan Zure hasn't joined the wood-gathering group yet. His 15-year-old aluminum boat is badly damaged, and the engine has broken down. He needs to travel 240 kilometers to Fairbanks to repair the engine and replace the boat's body. During busy times at home, his daughter Caitlin, who studies in the city, returns to help out. The boat repair could take several days, and Caitlin needs to manage the household affairs in his absence. There are thousands of dried fish in the fish shed, intended as food for the snowmobile dogs. However, while checking them, Stan Zure discovered signs of theft and found bear droppings with a fishy smell. It seems the bear that escaped from the dump has visited his place. With Stan planning to be away for several days for the boat repair, leaving only his wife and daughter at home, the thought of the bear returning is frightening. This bear must be dealt with, as bears have a higher propensity to attack humans than other animals and are more dangerous than wolves. Temporarily putting aside boat repairs and wood collection, Stan Zure focuses entirely on eliminating this threat. Bears usually avoid contact with humans unless driven by a lack of food. According to Stan Zure, in one particularly scarce year, bears attacked many people in the town, and the residents had no choice but to kill the bears and eat their meat. After a long chase, finding only fresh bear tracks, Stan realized the bear had vanished again. Despite hours of tracking, he returned home without success. He and his daughter must now stay alert, ready for a possible direct encounter with the bear. Suddenly, the dogs began barking furiously, a sure sign that someone or something had entered the property. Stan hurriedly grabbed his gun, knowing it must be the black bear returning. He knew not to shoot unless he could make a lethal shot, as wounding the bear could provoke a dangerous attack. Keeping a safe distance, he aimed for the bear's heart and lungs and waited for the right moment to fire. The bear fell at the sound of the gun. Approaching a wounded bear can be deadly, as they can attack in an instant. Only when the bear was confirmed dead did Stan, breathless with tension, finally relax. The bear's pelt, claws, and skull were worth approximately $2,000, not to mention the substantial amount of meat. Now Stan could proceed with buying a new boat with peace of mind. The automatic fish trap, a device placed in the river, allows locals to catch a large quantity of fish while enjoying their activities. Originating from the east coast of the USA during the 1800s gold rush, it was introduced to Alaska's natives and remains their primary fishing tool. The device works by river water turning a fan with fish racks, scooping up fish passing underneath. The fish slide down a sloped chute into a storage box. With the wood collection season over, Tanana's fishing season is about to start. Fish are a main source of food during winter, along with hunted meat, as fruits and vegetables are hard to come by. The annual fish migration, known as the fish run, requires the fish traps to be prepared in advance to not miss the peak period. Missing the fish run means less fish and potential hunger in winter. The fishing season lasts 4 weeks, during which fishing is legally permitted. Stan Zure sets his fish traps over 70 kilometers north of Tanana. His family, consisting of 4 people and 14 dogs, relies on these fish for sustenance. The new boat glided over the water, creating ripples that spread out in every direction. This beautiful scene was like living inside a painting, a stark contrast to the harsh realities of life. In less than an hour, Stan Zure arrived at the fishing camp where a young man named Izzy was already waiting. Whenever Joey was busy, Izzy would come to help Stan. The two divided the tasks. Stan Zure operated the winch while Izzy placed rollers under the fish trap. Weighing 4 tons, the fish trap was supported by a winch assembled from various parts, barely functional and somewhat unsafe. Stan Zure had almost lost 3 fingers to such old equipment, managing to save only 2. The launch of the water wheel was not smooth. A steel cable snapped, almost injuring Izzy, but they managed to avoid any serious harm. Stan Zure positioned the boat behind the fish trap, using its power to push the trap forward. The first thing upon reaching their destination was to install a storage box to hold the caught fish. The automatic fish trap would transfer the fish it caught into this box for temporary storage. The water at the shore was too shallow for the fan blades to operate, but placing the trap further into the river risked it being swept away by the strong currents. Stan Zure secured the fish trap to the shore with a steel cable and placed 2 long logs between the shore and the water wheel. One end of each log was fixed to the water wheel, and the other end was anchored to the shore with rocks, stabilizing the water wheel in deeper water. However, improper handling could cause the water wheel to hit the rocky riverbank and get damaged, which would delay the process significantly. As a seasoned professional, Stan Zure usually avoided such basic errors. They successfully positioned the water wheel in deep water and now awaited the catch. After a day, Stan Zure returned alone to the fish trap, feeling both excited and anxious. The storage box could either be full of fish or completely empty, much like opening a mystery box. When he scooped the net, he caught several fish, but to his disappointment, they were chum salmon, typically used as dog food in Tanana, where people prefer fresh fish. Catching a king salmon once made Hunter Charlie smile for a long time. During Tanana's fishing season, fishers split into 2 groups, those like Stan Zure who used automatic fish traps, and those like Charlie who used nets to catch migrating fresh fish. Each year, Charlie traveled about 100 kilometers north to his childhood home in Lampert, where nearly everyone was related to him. He had moved to Tanana perhaps for love. Lampert was another excellent spot for catching fresh fish. For generations, Charlie's family had fished these waters, sustaining the village, including Charlie's elderly mother, who now relied on the younger generation for fishing. Charlie aimed to catch 200 to 300 fresh fish this year to fill his freezer and help his mother through the tough winter. He opted not to use an automatic fish trap, as maintaining such machinery was time-consuming and labor-intensive. In contrast, fishing nets were much easier to manage and could be cleaned in a day. Charlie's brother Ike also joined in. They had fished together since childhood. For such labor-intensive tasks, the community came together to help. They loaded all their equipment onto the boat and set off. Near a hillside was Charlie's family fishing spot where they planned to set 7 nets, totaling over 200 meters. These nets were placed in the river's whirlpools, formed by bends or obstacles in the water, where some fish temporarily paused, ideal spots for the nets to catch them. One end of each net was anchored to the riverbank, and the other was weighed down at the riverbed. Without these whirlpools, it would be impossible to set the nets as the swift current would push them to the shore. Although the river was not privately owned, the locations of these whirlpools had been passed down through generations, and outsiders were not allowed to set nets there. Decades of fishing experience made setting these nets a routine task for them, and the 7 nets were quickly in place. The next day, it was time for Charlie and Ike to check their fishing nets. Harvesting is one of the most enjoyable parts of fishing, but using nets comes with many uncertainties. In a moment, it could be heaven or hell, which is precisely the thrill that hunters enjoy. On their way, they encountered a cougar crossing the river. An old superstition among the elders suggests that seeing a cougar cross a river is a bad luck omen, which made Charlie and Ike anxious. This was the first net they needed to check. They started by pulling up the anchor from the whirlpool and then slowly raised the net. Soaked nets are very heavy, and lifting them from the water is no easy task. In a sense, the fishermen are the hope of the whole village. Despite the difficulty and exhaustion, they persist. When they pulled up a fresh fish, both men were thrilled, thinking it was a good start. They hoped the subsequent nets would yield even better results. Indeed, the next net felt heavy, but when they pulled it up, it was only a large, hard rock. The remaining nets were empty, not even a rock in sight. This was a significant setback for Charlie's family, spending so much time only to catch 1 fish. However, setbacks like this are common in the wilderness, and hunters must overcome them and redouble their efforts. While automatic fish traps are convenient, their success still depends on fate. This fishing season, the Moore family faced the most setbacks. Their fish trap from last year had broken, and although they tried to gather wood from the river to rebuild it, They couldn't find suitable materials and ended up buying some from James. After 5 days of construction, the frame was finally ready. The last task was to make the fish baskets, which required a rare type of tree, the North American larch. This tree can be bent to the desired curvature without steam heating, provided the right amount of force is applied. However, Thomas More had not yet mastered this technique, and he broke a valuable larch by applying too much force, earning a scolding from his father. They now had to find more larch in the forest, or they would miss the first fish run. This search took up a lot of their time, but fortunately, they found a few suitable trees. By this time, most fishermen had their automatic fish traps set in the water. The Moors had to work non-stop to catch up. With the lessons learned, Thomas was much more careful this time. They completed 2 fish baskets and called in some helpers to assemble them with the previously built frame. Moore's daughter Courtney, who was learning carpentry from him, also came to help. She acted as the peacemaker in the family, preventing conflicts between her father and brother. Finally, the water wheel was completed and ready to be set in the river. The family's sustenance, along with food for their dozens of dogs, depended on this fish trap. Their fishing spot was 15 kilometers north, a carefully chosen area by the Moors that usually yielded plenty of king salmon. Setting such a large fish trap was challenging, and they faced a storm that made the installation even more difficult. However, they managed to set the trap without incident. A day later, the Moore family returned to the fish trap. Their survival through the winter depended on it, but luck was not on their side. The trap contained only a small whitefish, a significant blow to the Moors. The mood was somber, and pessimism spread among them. The situation worsened when a local policy change drastically affected their lives. In an effort to protect river fish, the originally 4-week fishing season was canceled with future opening times undecided. This policy made survival even more difficult for the residents of Tanana as autumn approached, followed by the harsh winter. They were left wondering how they would survive and feed their families. With food already scarce in winter, their wilderness life was nearing a potentially bleak end. 2 weeks later, the local fishing ban was finally lifted, but this time they were only given 18 hours. Although drastically reduced, this was still better than nothing. People began bustling about, preparing for the hard-won fishing season. The Moore family was also busy preparing. They have kept dogs for generations and rely on free dog food from the river to survive. The automatic fish trap had been in the river for 2 weeks and malfunctioned due to floating deadwood. Moore asked his son Thomas and daughter Courtney to check and repair the fish trap. Meanwhile, Joey returned to the camp. To increase their catch and become independent from his father, he and Izzy set out to place nets in his own area, providing a double safeguard for the brief fishing season. However, someone had already placed nets in his usual spot, which angered Joey. He decided to set his net in front of the existing one. Although it felt slightly underhanded, using someone else's spot without permission seemed even less ethical. A few hours later, Stan Zure went out to check the first catch of this fishing season. Finally, there was a harvest. Fresh fish began to be loaded just as he was pulling them in, and more fish continued to be caught in the trap. Although it was far from enough, it was a good start with less than 10 hours remaining in the fishing season. It was uncertain if Stan Zure could meet his minimum goal. Using the automatic fish trap, Stan Zure caught the first batch of fish, which in the Yukon River can grow up to 60 kilograms and survive up to 60 days without food. Their meat is considered a delicacy among salmon. On his way home with the catch, Stan Zure was intercepted by his friend Linda because she had taken over the whirlpool area belonging to Stan Zure's family. Upset, Joey had placed his net in front of hers. Linda approached Stan Zure to discuss this matter. Neighbors often have disputes, but they usually get along well, so Stan did not want to complicate things. He agreed to move the net. When Stan Zure and Joey met at the camp that evening, it was raining, and the temperature was below 9 degrees Celsius. Stan Zure did not directly mention Linda's concerns, but explained to Joey that setting the nets that way could lead to both catching nothing and possibly tangling. He suggested Joey move his net downstream for a win-win situation. Reluctantly, Joey agreed, and with Izzy, braved the rain to reset the net. As the 18-hour fishing season had passed its halfway point, Stan Zure's prediction proved correct. Despite Joey placing his net in front of another, he had not caught any fish. Setting nets on a rainy night was dangerous due to the slippery slopes and low visibility, risking injury. Despite the hazards, they managed to complete the task. The next day marked the end of the fishing season. It was Joey's first and last time pulling the nets for the season. The nets were full of fish, but he was not pleased as they were all local salmon, not meeting his goal of catching at least 10 fresh fish. Stanzure's feelings differed since he needed to feed his many sled dogs, and these salmon were perfect for that. As fresh fish continued to arrive, they ended up catching 15 fresh fish by the last check. However, they had not yet checked the automatic fish trap. Father and son unloaded their catch at the camp and quickly moved to check the fish trap. They were anxious, knowing this was their last chance to catch fresh fish. As Joey cast the net, their worries disappeared. The water tank was filled with fresh fish. By the end of the fishing season, they had caught a boatload of fish, delighting them both. That night, as they prepared to celebrate at the camp, the fish-stealing grizzly bear invaded again. Before Stanzure could react, Joey ran out and shot the bear with one bullet. The young hunter showed bravery and no fear of danger. In such difficult times, not only did they catch enough fish, but a bear also delivered itself to their doorstep, earning Stanzure and his son at least $2,000 and a large quantity of bear meat. After Charlie failed with net fishing, during a brief pause in net fishing, Charlie asked his son Bob to clear the winter hunting trails. Fur was their main source of income, and if the trails weren't maintained for over 2 years, others could take them over, effectively cutting off their income. After arranging things at home, Charlie returned to the river to check the nets, his first check since setting them. Supporting both elderly relatives and young children, along with many villagers, his pressure was something many could empathize with. The biggest fear with net fishing is drifting logs, which can easily tear the nets. Sometimes, what you fear most happens. The first net had a huge hole torn by a log, rendering it useless. Charlie was devastated. The net was worth $500, and he potentially lost dozens of fish. Although these nets are usually robust, only a very large log could cause such damage. However, he had no time to dwell on this as 6 more nets awaited his inspection. After 6 hours into the fishing season, they had caught only 1 salmon and lost a valuable net. This made Charlie feel desperate, with heartache and immense pressure likely leading to a sleepless night. The next day marked the end of the 18-hour fishing season, the last chance to catch fresh fish for the year. Fortune tends to favor the hard-working, and after many setbacks, Charlie's nets finally began to yield fish, mostly the fresh fish he desired, coming one after another, far exceeding expectations. Thinking of his family not having to starve in winter filled Charlie with joy. Not just him, but everyone on the boat shared in the joy of this bountiful harvest. Lampert, located upstream from Tanana, receives migrating fresh fish first each year, and with their family's whirlpool being large and deep, Charlie usually catches enough fish earlier than others. Despite many setbacks this year, the outcome was perfect. However, not everyone was as lucky as Charlie. The Moore family, who had painstakingly set up their automatic fish trap, returned disappointed every time they checked their catch during the 18-hour season. They caught only a few dozen fish, mostly salmon, marking it as one of the worst harvests in decades. Apart from the Moore family, James also set up nets, but his situation was even worse. He caught only a handful of fish, predominantly salmon, which were insufficient even as a snack for his many children and dogs. Wondering how to survive the winter, he felt utterly lost. While he was worrying, Joey, having heard that James had a poor fishing haul this year, brought him some bear meat. This meat could feed James's family for a few days. Joey's gesture was truly timely help. In fact, locals often share some of their game with others, believing that this generosity will lead to more success in future hunts. More importantly, Joey focused on helping those in need, fostering unity within the Tanana community.